Let's start differently. Maria, you believe in the idea of why in the area of communication. Before we introduce yourself, because before you introduce yourself, tell us why the word why is so important in communication.
To me, it's been life changing. I think it makes a huge difference in the rapport you build with people and your interpersonal skills and how far you can get in order to create that connection with the other person, whether it's something you want to influence them in or just to see your point of view. I think it makes a huge difference. So for me, both in my personal life and in my professional life, I've learned to use that why very much so especially in the beginning of whatever request I'm going to make.
Yeah, well, today it's all about communication, about feedback. Maria, you are the expert when it comes to communication, especially, and also in the area of giving feedback. So when I found you on LinkedIn, I instantly had the feeling we need to, well, invite you to the podcast. So, but before I talk too long, tell the readers or the listeners of this podcast who you are. Who are you?
My name is Maria Garaitonandia. I have been a consultant in leadership and communication skills for almost 20 years. And I'm passionate about this subject because ultimately we see how important it is for us to hone in and foster and polish our interpersonal intelligence, especially in this time of artificial intelligence.
Tell us more. Why is it so important?
It's very important because as long as we continue existing as a species, we need to deal with each other. We need to make decisions. We need to come to agreements. We can't delegate all that, at least not yet. We can't
We have
delegate
the
everything.
chatbot, Maria.
Yes, I know. But even there, I mean, AI has been incredible in helping us, and you are the big expert in that. And thank you for lots of your tips. But there are other things that you just need to solve. You need to solve certain things. And I think I had mentioned to you, I was very surprised with the recent Harris poll that talked about how companies are spending on average about $12,000. They're wasting $12,000 per capita on faulty communication because people are investing so much time in written asynchronous communication versus verbal real-time communication. And you just think about how much time do you usually spend to write an email only to have somebody ghost you or to come back with a very ambiguous answer and then having to do it again. It just happened to me recently. And knowing how to connect with the other person so that you're not just a chat box, but rather a very real person, it has become a skill that we're losing a little bit. You know what I mean?
So what's the solution? So if communication is so important and we're wasting so much money, what is the solution?
There's various solutions. One of the things we have to do is discern when is the right moment to stop going back and forth on written asynchronous communication, especially when there's situations that require a little bit more finesse, a certain type of sensitivity, especially if you're perceiving any kind of miscommunication or conflict. That's the moment where it's probably better just to stop going back and forth, especially capitalizing letters or whatnot. And it's probably the best moment to say, hey, what do you say? Let's just talk for 10 minutes. And oh, God forbid, but why not be a little spontaneous and just call without making an appointment? Why do we always have to make appointments to talk to people?
You will
That's what
shock
I would
some
like.
people. You will shock some people with this idea.
Yes, is that so revolutionary to think, to be spontaneous and just press the little call button on the Teams or grab your phone and call somebody? I mean, what's the worst that can happen? Say, listen, I'm busy right now. Can I call you back? Or, you know, give me 5 minutes. But it gives it a little bit of a sense of urgency. And the thing is that our interactions and our relationships, they're urgent. You don't just like push them aside because whatever you're doing at the moment, if you don't if you don't create that connection with somebody, you're just postponing it, and inevitably it's just going to get worse.
But it's
Especially,
scary. But
I'm
it's
sorry.
scary. It's scary. You cannot add it. You cannot. Well, you don't have time to somehow design the next answer. So it could be scary for especially young people, I guess.
It is, and I understand that. I guess my point is that if you are seeing that you are falling into that rut, like the Harris poll said, and you're wasting time and energy and resources, what do they say? Only a madman does the same thing, expecting a different result. Maybe it's time to connect, to talk. That's my, however you're going to talk, but see if you can. We've got so many platforms, but more is not necessarily better. What can we do to connect with that person? And there's something to be said about seeing people. A lot of times we have the bad habit of not wanting to turn on our webcam when we're working remotely. And that causes, it creates a barrier. It makes so much difference when you see somebody's face, because you can read on their nonverbal, right? Do you think what you're saying is total bananas, or are they engaged? And are you losing them, or do they disagree with you? All of that stuff, you lose it if you don't have that opportunity to talk to somebody.
Is there a difference between a live discussion, in-person discussion, and a virtual Zoom meeting? What do you think?
Obviously the in-person, and I think a poll was taken a number of years ago that said that even across generations, most people find that the quality of the exchange in person is always going to be superior. I think that that's pretty much a given, don't you think? Before we had Zoom and video platforms, you had to rely on a phone call, and you didn't have the visual, but at least you had, the tone. You could pick up on the tone, and you have the typical training that customer service always had. They're like, smile when you talk on the phone. You can hear the smile. And so that has a lot to do with that energy, the tone, the energy and the tone. But now that we have this, where we can see each other, I guess that's the second best, right? But then the third, it would be, okay, a phone call if you can't see the person, but at least you can still have the tone. And then the last one I would say is just the written, because the impact of a message, according to the Maria study, was you had, 55% is your nonverbal, 38% is your tone, and only 7% are the actual words. So if we're spending all this time on just the words, we're missing out on a very important opportunity of the 93% of the impact. Just something to ponder, right?
They're not completely against the virtual communication. I love to be able to talk to you. You're in Florida, I'm in Germany, so it's in the middle of the night here in Germany. It's like noon in Florida, so it has positive aspects.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
in your courses, the one topic I was fascinated by, you teach people, young people, how to give feedback and receive feedback. Can you give us some tips and tricks in this around this topic?
Well, I would go back to what we talked about, the going back to the why. And I think that many people, when they give feedback, they forget that very important element, that is why something is, whether you're giving recognition feedback to tell somebody, hey, yesterday I noticed when you did this, it had this impact, and it's important because, and that's when you give the why. This is really valuable because it fosters a sense of teamwork, because it made somebody's learning curve so much shorter, so it's very important to always integrate that why into your feedback, whether it's recognition or whether it's something that is corrective. When you need somebody to change something to make it better, why should they? It's not just telling them what they should do differently. You need to motivate by telling them why something would be much more valuable or better if they did it a different way. So starting off, usually it's a good idea, because a lot of people are nervous about giving corrective feedback because they feel like they don't want to hurt somebody's feelings, or they think that it might sound aggressive. But if you start off thinking that what you're giving somebody is an opportunity to improve, kind of like, hey, I got some ideas for you to improve. If you go in with that spirit, it's even going to flow differently from your mouth, because you know what your intention is, and it's a good intention. You got to just make sure that your intention is not just to, complain about something or somebody. What you got to start off figuring out is, is it my best intention for somebody to make something better? So I think it's just remembering that why, starting off also firstly with an objective description of what the situation is, or what the task is, or what the context is, very objectively, and then the action or the behavior that you're noticing, without using any kind of adjectives or value judgments, because if you do, then somebody's gonna. So it's very different to say, to tell somebody, you've been kind of, you're not really very, very committed to this new project. You've been very distracted. Because what are they going to do? They're going to be like, nuh-uh, what are you talking about? Whereas if you say, hey, I noticed that you haven't been to the last 2 meetings and you didn't respond to my last email, it's kind of like, okay, you're just saying the facts. So, and then you can get into, listen, I really need to make sure that we're on the same page for the benefit of this project. We want to make sure it works. So what do you think we can do to make it better? Or what do you say we get together to see what's missing, and we can work this together? And it sounds much more collaborative than saying, you're not committed to the project and I just don't know what's going on with you, blah, blah, blah. Because then that's criticism. That's not a good feedback. Do you see the difference?
So you don't see feedback as criticism. So negative feedback is, you wouldn't call it criticism.
No, because criticism is usually somebody pointing out your shortcomings, and nobody likes to be like, oh, you're so sensitive, or you're distracted, or you're this or that. That's criticism. But if you give me just the facts, and then of course there's a subjective element to the feedback, because this is how I'm interpreting these facts and this is how it's impacting me, that's very different, because I'm talking about an action either you took or you didn't take, and how it's affecting us. Mm-hmm. And then that's very different from just saying you are very X, Y, or Z.
Well, it probably feels scary for the young people you teach this concept at the beginning, but when they realize this is much more like a collaborative approach, do you see a change in their behavior? Do you see less fear of these kind of situations?
If you realize, and again, you have to start off with, where are you at? It's never a good idea to give feedback if you're annoyed or angry at somebody. So just right there, if you can honestly say, my purpose in providing this feedback is to achieve a result and to make sure that this person improves, then you know what, that comes through. Your intention pretty much comes through, and it may even be a good idea to verbalize that initially. And that takes away a little bit of the edge or the fear, both of the person who's giving the feedback, and it also puts the person who's receiving the corrective feedback a little bit more at ease, because you've heard what the other person's intention is up front. And again, that's starting with why. Hey, I'd like to share something with you so that we can make this process a little easier. I want to share something with you because I've been struggling with how we've been doing things. So you can use that why in the beginning, and then of course you can use it at the end to tell the person what the impact is and why it's so valuable, or why it's important, or why it's not working, or whatever. But that why needs to be there, both in the beginning and at the end.
But even giving positive feedback could be difficult for some people. You just before we press the record button, you just told me the story of a senior manager who destroyed a positive feedback with the word "but." Tell us.
Yes, yes. So this person that I'm coaching, who's very senior, tells me that one of the feedbacks he's gotten is that he kind of puts a damper on the moments of celebration. And as you know, celebrating successes is extremely important in order to keep that morale and to keep things running. And so he tells me, he says, I realize that a lot of times, maybe it's like a subconscious fear, like you can't get too cocky. So sometimes he'll just say, yeah, we did a great job, but we got to make sure that we don't miss the target. But, and then of course, that really, it just ruins the whole purpose of giving that feedback of keep doing that because it's good. This is a good thing that you've done. And sometimes you just have to recognize and stop. And then at another moment further on, then that's when you can start thinking of your next ambitious project. And he did say, he said to me, I realized sometimes it has to do with, things I carry, maybe a sense of, wanting to be the best. So we all have our own voices inside of us in the way that we do. And if we're successful in a certain way, sometimes we can overdo certain strengths instead of, using them to be able to continue forward. It can sometimes handicap us if we overdo things a little too much.
So, well, this means negative feedback and positive feedback are both, can be destroyed with small, tiny words like but and kind of. Yeah. So communication is difficult. Yeah.
It sure is. It sure is, but it's also very fulfilling.
Maria, you teach executives and students everything around the topic of communication. Can you share with us some of the aha moments that people experience in your classes or in your coaching sessions? What are some smaller things where people realize, I didn't know, but now that I'm aware of this, could you share some of these things with us?
Well, this simple model with which, we've heard Simon Sinek talk about a lot is a very simple one. Also, I would say that when we want to persuade people, we tend to be very short-term thinkers instead of opening up and using a little bit of more of an energy to draw people in by using open-ended questions. It's one very simple thing that we can change in our communication. Landing one really good open-ended question can give us a lot of insight, especially when we're stuck with either a problem or a relationship issue, to really have that curiosity to want to just learn more and let the other person speak. Active listening, open-ended questions, they go a long way.
It sounds like a lot of work. It could be discouraging.
Not really. Sometimes when you're in that moment when you see that you've reached an impasse, that might be the perfect moment to say, okay, wait a minute, let me regroup. And instead of trying to, for example, persuade somebody by proposing and reasoning and trying to, push, it might be a moment to just stop and take a pause, ask a question, and just ponder, and maybe even let a couple seconds go by, because we think a lot faster than we talk. So we could take a couple minutes just to, a couple seconds, not a couple minutes. You could take a couple of seconds to just think and ponder and be kind of mindful of the moment and read what's going on, right? Because a lot of times people are telling us a lot, and you need to listen a little bit to the emotion behind the message to be able to read what's going on underneath, right?
Yeah, the same thing applies to body language. It's exactly the same thing that I'm talking about. Yeah, you see what they want to tell you before they tell you often. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's why
Maria,
it's so important to turn your cameras on when you're on a call.
yeah. Well, people are not always willing to, but yes.
Uh,
Maria, where can people find you? So where can they connect with you when they want to learn new things about communicating, giving feedback from you? Where can they find you?
well, LinkedIn is one, and my web page is globalbridgestraining.com.
Fantastic. Thank you for all the tips and tricks for better communication. So to everyone else, please connect with Maria on LinkedIn, visit her homepage, and to learn more about communication and feedback and all these things. Thank you so much.
Thank you.